Wife. Came home from work. Late to find her husband's belongings. Completely gone and only a mysterious envelope. Left behind on the kitchen counter. Hey everyone, my name is Kevin and I'm 29 years old. I've been living in Miami for the past few years after making the decision to relocate here, and it's been one of the best choices I've ever made. I work as a marketing manager at a decent company where I've managed to build a solid career for myself. The money is good, allowing me to live in a nice area of the city and drive an expensive car that I genuinely love. From the outside looking in, my life probably seems perfect. For the past 6 years, I've been in a relationship with my girlfriend Jessica. We've built what I thought was a strong partnership together, sharing our lives and creating memories. We also have a golden retriever named Bruno, who's been an incredible addition to our little family. For the longest time, I genuinely believed I had everything figured out: the career, the relationship, the lifestyle. Everything seemed to be falling into place exactly as I'd always hoped it would. But last Wednesday night, everything changed in ways I never could have anticipated. Jessica came home from what she'd told me was a business dinner, and something felt immediately wrong. The moment she walked through the door, I could sense that the entire atmosphere in our home had shifted. The house was completely dark, except for a single hallway light that cast long, dramatic shadows across our hardwood floors. She stood at the threshold, clutching her purse tightly in one hand while her other hand was still wrapped around her keys. She hadn't let go of them yet, as if some part of her wasn't quite ready to fully enter the space. There was something different in the air that night. It wasn't just the usual silence you'd expect when someone comes home late. This was something deeper, more profound. It felt like emptiness had settled into our home in a way I'd never experienced before. What struck me immediately was that Bruno didn't come to greet her at the door. Our golden retriever always bounded over to welcome either of us home, his tail wagging with pure excitement. But that night, there was nothing. Just Jessica's heels clicking slowly across the floor as she made her way through our home, each step echoing in the unusual quiet. Then the clicking stopped completely when she reached the kitchen. That's when she saw it. There, resting in the center of our kitchen counter, was an envelope. It was heavy cream-colored paper, placed there with what appeared to be deliberate precision. Her name was written across the front in black ink, not with any flourish or affection. Just a simple, stark Jessica that seemed to carry more weight than any love letter ever could. She stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity before finally reaching for it. I could imagine her eyes darting quickly toward the living room, taking in details that would have been obvious to anyone who really looked. The jacket I always draped over the back of our couch was gone. The charger that used to snake from the wall to the end table had disappeared as well. All the small, everyday markers of my presence in our shared space had simply vanished. I can only imagine how her chest must have tightened as the reality of the situation began to sink in. She didn't move from that spot in the kitchen, just stood there frozen with those keys still clutched tightly in her fingers. It was as if the simple act of unlocking our front door had triggered some kind of detonation inside the life she thought she knew, setting off a chain reaction she hadn't seen coming and couldn't control. The silence in our home that night must have been deafening. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a peaceful evening. It was the kind of silence that roars in your ears and makes your heart pound. Finally, she opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, she found 2 things that would change everything. The first was a flash drive, small and unassuming, but containing evidence that would shatter any illusions she might have had about keeping her secret. The second was a folded piece of paper with a single sentence written in sharp, steady lines that left no room for misinterpretation. Watch it, and then remember how many times you looked me in the face and lied. There was no greeting, no attempt at explanation, no emotional plea or angry rant. Just that one brutal, honest sentence that cut straight to the heart of what had been happening between us. No goodbye either. Just the cold, hard truth laid bare. The impact was immediate and devastating. She dropped her keys to the floor, the sound echoing through the empty house like a final punctuation mark on the end of our relationship. Hours earlier, I had been sitting in my car parked outside an Italian restaurant on Ocean Drive. Through my windshield, I watched as Jessica laughed at something the man across the table had said. But this wasn't just polite social laughter. She was laughing too hard, with too much enthusiasm, in a way that made my stomach turn. The man appeared to be in his mid-30s, sporting a short, well-groomed beard and wearing a dark blazer. His hair screamed of that particular kind of midlife charm offensive that some men perfect as they age. What really got to me was when she reached across the table and touched his wrist. It was just a brief brush of contact, nothing that would seem inappropriate to a casual observer, but I felt it like a punch directly to my chest. The intimacy of that small gesture spoke volumes about where their relationship had progressed. I didn't cry in that moment. I didn't even blink. I just leaned back in my driver's seat and let the confirmation settle deep into my bones. This wasn't just about physical betrayal. That would have been devastating enough. What truly gutted me was seeing the ease with which she interacted with him. There was a smile on her face that I hadn't seen directed at me in months, maybe longer. The way her hand curved around her wine glass, the tilt of her head when she listened to him speak. It was like watching her perform in a scene she had rehearsed countless times before. This wasn't some spontaneous fling or moment of weakness. This was clearly a routine they had established, a relationship that had developed its own rhythm and intimacy. That realization hit me harder than any single act of betrayal could have. That morning, I had already set everything in motion with calculated precision. I had quietly moved about half of my belongings into a rented loft located 2 neighborhoods over from our shared home. I chose this particular space specifically because it was quiet and completely free of any memories we had created together. There would be no ghost of her perfume lingering on the pillows, no familiar corners that would trigger painful recollections of better times. Bruno was already settled into our new temporary home, sprawled out on a brand new rug, and snoring peacefully as if he somehow understood that we weren't planning to return to the house we'd all shared. Dogs have an incredible intuition about these things, and Bruno seemed to sense that this move represented a permanent change rather than just a temporary arrangement. I want to be clear about something. I didn't plan to leave Jessica some dramatic movie scene note filled with accusations and emotional manipulation. That wasn't my style, and honestly, I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. But I needed her to see the truth with her own eyes. I needed her to understand that I knew exactly what had been happening, not because she had finally found the courage to tell me, but because I had done what was necessary to uncover the reality of our relationship. I was completely done giving her space to continue lying to my face. So I made the decision to give her the footage that would make denial impossible. The private investigator I had hired had done his job thoroughly and professionally. He had documented 3 separate dinner dates and 1 overnight stay at a hotel in Coral Gables. It was the same man every single time, always meeting under different excuses that Jessica had carefully crafted to explain her absences. The PI had provided me with enough evidence to completely burn her entire life to the ground if I had chosen to go that route. But I didn't want to destroy her publicly or seek some kind of nuclear revenge. Instead, I made the conscious decision to only send her what she absolutely needed to see: the undeniable proof that the curtain had finally dropped and the audience had left the theater. I wanted her to sit alone with that knowledge and fully comprehend the weight of her choices. Over the past few weeks, she had been lying to me with such casual comfort that it was almost impressive in its audacity. I remember one particular Wednesday when I had made tacos for dinner. They were her absolute favorite, and I had gone out of my way to get all the ingredients she liked. When she came home that evening, she barely touched the meal I had prepared with care. She claimed her stomach was hurting and that she just couldn't eat anything substantial. But then, less than 10 minutes later, she was laughing at something on her phone with genuine amusement. When I tried to glance over to see what was so entertaining, she quickly locked the screen before I could catch even a glimpse of what had captured her attention so completely. That was the moment when I knew, deep down in my gut, what was really happening. I just wasn't quite ready to fully believe it yet. Wasn't prepared to accept that the woman I loved and trusted could be living such an elaborate double life right under my nose. You know what's actually worse than betrayal itself? It's knowing that the person you love doesn't even respect you enough to cover up their deception properly. That's exactly what Jessica had given me over these past weeks. Sloppy, careless deceit that insulted my intelligence and showed just how little she thought of my ability to see through her lies. After I had dropped the envelope on our kitchen counter, I simply left. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match where we hurled accusations and defenses at each other like weapons. Just silence. The kind of profound, heavy silence that buries itself deep in your skin and changes something fundamental about how you see the world. What surprised me most was that she didn't call me immediately after discovering the contents of that envelope. I had expected my phone to start ringing within minutes, filled with frantic voicemails of her voice cracking under the weight of being caught. I thought there would be desperate attempts to explain away something that I already knew she couldn't possibly justify with any amount of creative storytelling. Instead, the silence stretched on through the entire night and into the early morning hours. It felt like a tight wire had been strung between us, pulled to the absolute breaking point and ready to snap at any moment. But still, my phone remained eerily quiet. By noon the following day, it became clear that this wasn't just silence anymore. This was deliberate avoidance. I found myself sitting cross-legged on the floor of my new loft, with Bruno resting his large golden head on my knee. He seemed to sense that something deep inside me had cracked open, some fundamental part of my emotional foundation that had been holding everything together. I kept staring at my phone, then putting it face down on the floor beside me, then picking it back up again only to put it right back down. This cycle repeated itself countless times as I wrestled with my own expectations and emotions. Eventually, I made the decision to turn the device off completely. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to come up with yet another elaborate lie to feed me. I had spent too many months already giving her the benefit of the doubt, making excuses for behavior that deep down I knew was inexcusable. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with the first message from her. "Can we talk? I'm confused, please." The tone wasn't angry or panicked like I might have expected from someone who had just been caught in such a massive deception. Instead, it felt calculated and controlled, like she had taken time to craft her response carefully. I didn't reply. 20 minutes later, another message arrived. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I swear to God, Kevin, it's not what it looks like. Please call me." That particular message actually made me laugh out loud in the empty loft. It's not what it looks like. How do people manage to say that phrase with a straight face? Do they actually practice these responses in front of a mirror, rehearsing their denial scripts for when they inevitably get caught? The next message came in what felt like a flood of words, multiple paragraphs of desperate explanation. "Yes, okay, I met someone for dinner, but it's not what you think. He's a former client. He was going through hard time, and I was just trying to be supportive. He hugged me goodbye. And I guess if someone was watching it might have looked bad, but nothing happened, Kevin. I would never hurt you like that. I love you, please believe me." Right. Except I wasn't there watching the night she held his face tenderly in her hands, outside that cheap hotel and kissed him like she genuinely meant every second of it. I wasn't there when she walked into that hotel room with him and didn't emerge until 7 o'clock the following morning. But my private investigator was there, documenting everything with timestamps that don't lie or allow for creative reinterpretation. Still, I chose not to reply to any of her increasingly desperate attempts at communication. 3 hours after her last text message, Jessica finally decided to call me directly. I let the phone ring out 5 times in a row, watching her name appear and disappear on my screen with each attempted call. The persistence was almost admirable in its desperation, but I wasn't ready to give her the satisfaction of hearing my voice. After the 5th missed call, the ringing stopped and was replaced by silence once again. She left exactly 1 voicemail, and I found myself waiting for quite a while before I could bring myself to listen to it. When I finally pressed play, her voice came through with a tone that was far too calm for someone who had just been caught in such a massive betrayal. "Kevin, I don't know what you think is happening, but I think you're spiraling. This kind of behavior isn't healthy. You packed up and left like a coward. You could have just asked me about anything that was bothering you, but no. You had to make it into this huge dramatic thing like you always do. If you're trying to manipulate me into chasing after you, congratulations, it's working. I'm worried about you. I think we should talk, but only when you're ready to act like an adult." Then she hung up abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in complete disbelief. I played that voicemail again, and then a 3rd time, just to make sure I had heard her correctly. I sat there absolutely stunned by the sheer audacity of what she had just said. That was her angle. She was going to gaslight me and pretend that I had somehow imagined the entire situation. Here I was, a man who had spent 6 years of his life genuinely loving this woman. Really, truly loving her in all the ways that matter. I had picked up groceries she forgot to buy, sent her thoughtful midday text reminders so she wouldn't stress about important deadlines, and spent countless nights listening to her cry about difficult clients who screamed at her over the phone. I had consistently told her she was enough, even during those dark periods when she hated her body, her job, or herself. And now, after discovering her betrayal through undeniable evidence, here she was treating me like I was the problem in our relationship. I think that's the exact moment when the anger finally hit me with full force. It wasn't the loud, explosive kind of anger that makes you want to scream and throw things. Instead, it was the cold, calculated kind that starts somewhere deep in your spine and slowly spreads behind your eyes. It's the kind of anger that settles into your bones and doesn't shake loose easily. She hadn't just cheated on me, that would have been devastating enough on its own. No, she had taken things much further than simple infidelity. She had completely rewritten our entire story to cast me as the villain in her narrative. And in that moment of crystal clear realization, I understood something crucial. If I even cracked the door open to let her speak, if I gave her even the smallest opportunity to explain herself, she would find a way to twist the entire situation around. She would somehow make herself into the victim of my paranoid and controlling behavior. She would paint me as insecure, toxic, and unstable. But I had something she couldn't argue with or spin to her advantage. I had receipts. Literal, documented proof. I had footage, dates, times, and timestamps. I had evidence of her wearing that beautiful, genuine smile, the one I hadn't seen directed at me since sometime last year. While she was with him, I stood up from the floor, walked over to my desk, and opened my laptop with renewed purpose. I uploaded everything to a carefully organized folder that I titled simply Closure. This wasn't for her benefit. This was entirely for mine. That night, she sent one final text message. "I don't even recognize you anymore. You've changed." And for the first time in months, I found myself genuinely smiling. Because yes, I absolutely had changed, and I was finally beginning to understand that this transformation was exactly what I needed. The next day, she decided to show up at my loft in person. I heard the knock before I actually saw her through the peephole. 3 short, deliberate raps against the door, as if she was trying not to sound too eager or too loud, too exposed or desperate. I remained perfectly still on my couch, not making a sound. Bruno immediately lifted his head from where he had been resting and let out a low, rumbling growl under his breath. It was interesting to note that he had always liked Jessica throughout our entire relationship, but lately, something had shifted in his attitude toward her. I positioned myself at the peephole and looked out to see her standing in the hallway. There she was, with every strand of her hair perfectly in place, not a single piece out of line. She was wearing just the right amount of makeup, enough to convey the message, "I didn't cry over you, but I still look good enough to make you regret leaving." She was holding her phone in one hand and a large tote bag in the other, probably filled with carefully selected props for this performance. I could easily imagine that bag containing some of my forgotten shirts, maybe a framed picture of us from happier times, anything that might tug at the strings of memory and nostalgia. I almost expected her to pull out a PowerPoint presentation, detailing all the reasons why I should reconsider my decision. I made the conscious choice not to open the door for her. She knocked again, more insistently this time. Then her voice came through the wood, calm and steady, too steady for someone who was supposedly dealing with the collapse of a 6-year relationship. "Kevin, I know you're in there," she said with absolute certainty. Bruno's bark wasn't exactly subtle, so my presence was pretty much confirmed whether I wanted it to be or not. She waited a beat, then continued. "I'm not here to fight, I don't know what to do unless we talk." That particular line, "I don't know what to do unless we talk," was one she had used before. About 4 years ago, I had caught her texting some guy named Jason late at night while sitting on our porch. When I confronted her about it, she swore up and down that he was just a friend from college and that their conversations were completely innocent. She had insisted that I was making something out of nothing, that she simply needed emotional space sometimes, and it wasn't about me or our relationship. Somehow, by the end of that conversation, she had managed to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. I actually ended up apologizing to her for being suspicious and jealous. After that incident, I had opened the door to reconciliation and forgiveness. This time, however, I had no intention of repeating that mistake. Instead of opening the door, I raised my voice just loud enough for her to hear me clearly through the wood. "I'm not interested in hearing any more of your fiction." There was a pause, and then she responded with what sounded like genuine confusion. "What are you talking about? I haven't lied to you, Kevin." And just like that, we were completely off the rails again. I opened the door halfway and leaned against the frame, letting the cold air spill into the space between us. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't actually expected me to confront her face to face. She looked surprised that I didn't appear broken or defeated by our separation. "You haven't lied?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat and emotionless. "Then who's the guy you've been spending nights with in Coral Gables? You think hotel clerks don't remember faces or that security cameras don't exist?" I watched as a flash of unmistakable guilt flickered across her eyes. It was barely there for a second, but it was all I needed to see. She caught herself quickly, though, and her expression hardened. "That's insane," she said, adding a scoff for dramatic effect. "You hired someone to follow me? That's completely psychotic behavior. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of her response. You think that's the real issue here? That I confirmed what my gut already knew was happening? I can't believe you're turning into this bitter, paranoid freak, she snapped, and her voice wasn't calm anymore. There it was, the facade cracking open to reveal what was really underneath. You always had control issues. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with being the perfect husband, I wouldn't have needed to. She stopped herself mid-sentence. I tilted my head slightly and looked directly into her eyes. Wouldn't have needed what, Jessica? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. She was completely caught, trapped by her own words, and we both knew it. I stepped back and opened the door wider, gesturing toward the hallway behind me with a sweep of my arm. There's nothing left in here for you, I said with quiet finality. You don't live here anymore. You made that decision when you got into that guy's car instead of coming home to me. I didn't sleep with him, she said quickly, her eyes narrowing as she tried to regain control of the narrative. You're creating some elaborate story to make yourself feel like the victim in all of this. I stepped aside and reached over to the small table near the entrance, where I had strategically placed a manila folder that I had prepared earlier for exactly this moment. I held it out toward her with steady hands. Then you should have no problem watching this, I said calmly. She hesitated, staring at the folder like it might burst into flames if she touched it. You're bluffing, she said, though her voice had dropped to a much lower register than before. You can watch it right now, Jessica, I said, taking a step forward. Right here, right now. Let's relive those moments together. She didn't take the folder. Her hands remained frozen at her sides, completely motionless. And for the first time since this entire confrontation had begun, I saw something genuinely real behind her eyes. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't guilt. It was pure, unadulterated fear. But this wasn't fear of losing me, or fear of the consequences of her actions. This was fear of exposure, fear of having her carefully constructed lies laid bare for everyone to see. I'm not doing this, she muttered, turning away from me and the folder. You want to make me out to be some kind of monster? Fine. Enjoy your little pity parade. And then she simply walked away, her heels clacking against the hard floor of the hallway. Her back remained perfectly straight as she retreated, like she hadn't just been caught burning her entire marriage to the ground with her own hands. I didn't chase after her. I didn't call out her name or make any last-ditch effort to salvage what was left of our relationship. Instead, I closed the door slowly and deliberately. Bruno immediately lay back down on his bed, his tail giving one satisfied thump against the floor, as if he somehow knew that she wouldn't be coming back to disrupt our peace again. Neither did I have any expectation of her return. And for the first time in months, the silence that filled my apartment didn't feel like a threat hanging over my head. Instead, it felt like pure, blessed relief. That night, I slept for 8 completely uninterrupted hours. There was no tossing and turning, no checking my phone at 3 a.m. to see if she had tried to contact me, no rehearsing imaginary arguments in my head, or thinking of clever comebacks I'd never get the opportunity to use. Just deep, heavy, dreamless sleep that my body and mind desperately needed. When I woke up the next morning, the city outside my window felt quieter somehow. Or maybe it was just the absence of Jessica's presence in my thoughts that made everything seem more peaceful. Jessica had always had this particular way of taking up mental space without even speaking. She could clear a room with just a certain look, or fill it with uncomfortable static energy when she was hiding something from me. Looking back now, I realized that this unsettling atmosphere had been happening for a very long time. I just hadn't been willing to acknowledge it for what it really was. Around 10 a.m., I decided to check my phone for any missed calls or messages. I found 2 calls from an unknown number, one from her sister Paige, and another from her old friend Kayla. I didn't feel compelled to answer any of them immediately, but I was curious enough to listen to the voicemail that Paige had left. The message was short and sounded uncomfortable, like she didn't really know what to say, but felt some kind of family obligation to reach out anyway. Hey Kevin, I heard what happened. Jessica told me you were going through something, but I don't know. She made it sound like you just cracked or had some kind of breakdown. But then I saw her last night and she looked completely wrecked. And she never looks like that. Just call me if you need anything seriously. So that's how Jessica was spinning this situation to her family. She wasn't mentioning the cheating at all, wasn't saying anything about the other man or the hotel stays. Instead, she was feeding her sister some vague narrative about me having a mental breakdown. She was probably hinting that I was unstable or even dangerous, painting herself as the innocent victim of my sudden psychological collapse. Maybe she had even managed to produce some tears to sell the performance more convincingly. Jessica had always been remarkably good at summoning tears on command. She could flip that switch like turning on a faucet whenever the situation called for it. I decided to text Paige back with just one simple line. Ask her about the Marriott in Coral Gables, room 412, 3 nights ago. I never heard back from her after that message. Later that same day, my lawyer called to inform me that she had the documents ready for the next phase of this process. The separation papers were prepared and ready to be filed, plus a formal notice invoking the clause in our prenuptial agreement. Jessica had never taken that prenup seriously when we signed it years ago. She had dismissed it as just a formality, something that would never actually matter in our relationship. But I had insisted on it at the time. Not because I didn't trust her, or because I was planning for our relationship to fail, but because I had witnessed what happened to 2 of my close friends who went through absolutely messy, devastating divorces that destroyed both of them financially and emotionally. I never thought I would actually need to use the protections that prenup provided. But there it was, sitting in my email inbox, ready to be executed and formalized. The agreement made everything remarkably clean and straightforward. No alimony payments, no complicated splitting of assets that I had built up before our marriage. We would each keep what we had brought into the relationship and what we had earned individually during our time together. The house was purchased entirely in my name. Jessica had never wanted to co-sign on the mortgage, claiming that it felt too adult and made her uncomfortable with the level of commitment it represented. That decision had stung a bit in the beginning, since it meant I was carrying the entire financial burden of our housing costs alone. But now, in this moment, it felt like an absolute blessing that would save me countless headaches and legal complications. And still, despite having all the legal framework in place to move forward cleanly, I found myself hesitating. Because no matter how angry I was, no matter how disgusted and disillusioned I felt about what she had done, there was still a part of me that remembered loving her deeply. Part of me still wanted to hear her say the truth. Not the twisted, gaslit, sanitized version she had been trying to sell me, but the real, honest truth about what had happened and why. So I made the decision to call her one more time. The phone rang twice before she answered, and there was no greeting when she picked up, just the sound of her breathing on the other end of the line. "I thought you blocked me," she said, and her voice was filled with bitterness. "I did," I replied calmly. "I unblocked you just now. Don't get comfortable." There was a long pause on the line, filled only with the sound of our breathing. Then she finally asked, "What do you want?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked out the window of my loft at the street below, watching people pass by as their lives moved forward in normal, uncomplicated ways. Meanwhile, my own life had become stalled in the wreckage of her choices and betrayals. "I want the truth, Jessica," I said finally. "One version of events. No metaphors, no creative excuses, no elaborate justifications. Just say it." The silence stretched between us again, and then I heard a soft, brittle laugh escape from her throat. "You want the truth?" she said, and I could hear her voice rising with each word. "Okay, here's the truth for you. I was lonely, Kevin. You were always physically there, but you were never really present with me. You were so completely obsessed with doing everything perfectly right that you made me feel like I was just another item on your checklist to be managed." She paused for a breath, then continued with increasing intensity. "Do you want to hear that? Does that make you feel better about yourself?" "So you cheated?" I said, cutting straight through her justifications. "Because I loved you quietly instead of loudly? Because I showed my affection through actions rather than constant dramatic gestures?" "I cheated," she said flatly, with no emotion whatsoever in her voice. "Because I wanted to feel wanted again, and he looked at me like I was still alive and vibrant. You looked at me like I was just another responsibility you had to handle." I didn't say anything in response. I just let her words hang in the air between us. "And you know what?" she added, her voice turning absolutely icy now. "I don't even regret it, not really. I regret getting caught, and I regret that you're acting like some self-righteous martyr when you ignored every single sign for months. You're acting like this whole thing just happened to you, like you're some innocent victim." Her voice was getting more heated with each sentence. "Grow up, Kevin. People are messy and complicated. Relationships require work from both people." And just like that, the call ended abruptly. She hung up on me, and it was finally over. This time, the anger I had been expecting didn't come rushing in to fill the silence. There was no surge of rage or hurt feelings. Just quiet, profound silence. Just me standing alone in my apartment that didn't echo with painful memories anymore. staring out at a city that didn't care about my personal drama. And for once in a very long time, I found that I didn't care either. I didn't need another elaborate explanation from her. I didn't need her apology or her remorse. I didn't need her to acknowledge the pain she had caused or take responsibility for her actions. I just needed distance from all of it. And that was exactly what I was finally getting. 3 days later, I received a text message from her. It was simple and cold, not angry or emotional, just completely transactional in tone. It read, "If you're done being dramatic, I'd like to come get the rest of my things. When are you gone?" There was no apology anywhere in that message, no attempt to reconnect or repair what had been broken between us. Just a logistics request, like I was a landlord she mildly resented dealing with. Like the 6 years of my life that I had invested in our relationship had been reduced to nothing more than a pickup window at a fast food restaurant. I stared at that text for a very long time, my thumb hovering over the screen as I considered how to respond. I almost typed out an angry response telling her exactly what I thought of her attitude. I almost reminded her that I had already given her the opportunity to explain herself, to be human and honest about what had happened, and that she had burned that chance completely. But I didn't send any of those responses. Instead, I typed out something brief and to the point. Saturday 12 to 2. After that, you'll need to go through my attorney. She read the message instantly, but there was no reply. I didn't plan to be there when she came to collect her belongings. But Saturday morning found me getting into my car and driving back toward the house anyway. I'm not entirely sure what drove me to make that decision. Maybe I needed some kind of closure. Or maybe there was still a part of me that needed to understand how that place, our place, had become the stage for a lie so massive that I had stopped being able to recognize my own memories. When I pulled up to the house, her car was already sitting in the driveway. And there he was, the other man, completely unmistakable. He had the same well-groomed beard and was wearing the same style of dark blazer that I had seen him in at the restaurant. He looked like a caricature of himself, playing some kind of role that felt almost too obvious to be real. He was leaning casually against the passenger door of Jessica's car, checking his phone with an expression of mild boredom, as if this entire situation was just a minor inconvenience in his day, rather than the final destruction of a 6-year relationship. Jessica was already inside the house, probably digging through drawers and closets like she was on some kind of scavenger hunt for pieces of her past life. The man looked up when he noticed me getting out of my car and straightened up immediately. I stood on the sidewalk without moving any closer, just watching him. He didn't say a single word, just stared back at me with an uncertain expression. I smiled at him. It was one of those completely dead, humorless smiles that sends a very clear message. You have absolutely no idea what kind of emotional wreckage you're standing in the middle of right now. I waited there for a full minute, then 2, just maintaining eye contact and letting the weight of the moment settle between us. Jessica finally emerged from the house carrying a cardboard box filled with her belongings. When she saw me standing there, she froze for just half a breath, clearly caught off guard by my presence. Then she set the box down on the front steps and called out to me, "I thought you wouldn't be here." Her voice was light and annoyed, like I was the one causing unnecessary drama by showing up at my own house. "I wasn't planning to be," I replied calmly. "I just wanted to make sure you didn't take anything that wasn't actually yours." She gave a sharp, dry laugh that cut through the morning air. "Like what? Your moral high ground?" I walked closer to where she was standing, moving slowly and deliberately. I looked her straight in the face. Not because I wanted to intimidate her, or because I needed to get in some final cutting remark, but because I needed to see what was actually left of the person I thought I had known and loved. She looked different from the woman I remembered. Not broken exactly, but hollow somehow. Like she was wearing a mask that was trying too hard to stay attached to her face. "That guy," I said quietly, tilting my head toward the car where he was still standing. "Is he worth it?" She blinked several times before answering. "It's not about him. Then what is it about?" She hesitated, looking past me toward the horizon, toward anything that wasn't my eyes. "It's about not being invisible," she said finally. "He didn't make me feel guilty for needing attention. He didn't make me feel like I was constantly competing with your perfection all the time." My jaw tightened involuntarily. "You weren't competing with me, Jessica. You were sabotaging yourself." She turned away from me and walked toward the car. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, Kevin." I almost let her leave with that dismissive comment. Almost. But as she opened the car door, I felt compelled to say one more thing. "You don't feel invisible because of me, Jessica," I called out. "You feel invisible because you never bothered to show up. Not for me, not for yourself." She didn't turn around to face me. She just got into the car and slammed the door with a little too much force, the sound echoing across the quiet residential street. I stood there and watched as they drove away together. And just like that, it was completely finished. The chapter was finally closed. Not with some dramatic bang or explosive confrontation, but with the quiet, dragging sigh of relief, the kind that settles deep into your ribs and makes you realize just how much emotional weight you had been carrying around without even knowing it. The woman I had loved was a story that I had to stop rereading. No amount of remembering the good times or analyzing what went wrong would make the ending any less of a lie. That night, I went back to my loft and made a deliberate decision. I threw away every photograph that still had her in it, every physical reminder of our time together. Bruno curled up by the door, watching me with those understanding golden retriever eyes as I worked. We were free now, both of us. I didn't hear from Jessica again for nearly 2 weeks after that final encounter. The silence was a strange kind of mercy, the type that feels suspicious at first, like the calm before some fresh storm is about to hit. But then, the quiet just stayed that way, final and complete. I spent those 2 weeks systematically rebuilding my daily habits and routines. I started waking up in the morning without immediately wondering what kind of mood she would be in that day. I could eat whatever I wanted for meals without hearing commentary about clean eating days or how carbohydrates supposedly slow down your energy levels. I took Bruno for long walks without feeling the need to rush home to make sure I was back before her temper started simmering over some imagined slight or neglect. Freedom doesn't always arrive like a sudden gust of wind that changes everything in an instant. Sometimes it just quietly tiptoes into your daily routine, slowly replacing every anxious heartbeat with the ability to breathe normally again. But it wasn't until the 3rd week had passed that I started feeling genuinely normal. Not good exactly, not completely healed, but stable and grounded in a way I hadn't experienced in months. That's when I received the email. The subject line read simply, "For the record." It was from Jessica, and there was no greeting, no emotional preamble, just one typed paragraph that laid out her final thoughts. "I know you think I'm the villain in all this, and maybe I am, but I wasn't lying when I said I was lonely and I wasn't trying to destroy you. You made it so easy to feel like you didn't need anyone. You were always so composed, so damn controlled. I didn't know how to reach you, so I stopped trying. He made me feel seen. It doesn't excuse what I did, but that's the truth. I hope you find peace eventually." Reading that message should have made me angry. It should have triggered all the rage and hurt feelings that I had been processing over the past few weeks. But it didn't. Instead, it made me profoundly sad. Not sad for myself or for what I had lost, but sad for her. Sad for the version of Jessica who could write something like that and still think she was explaining something noble or understandable. She was still trying to frame her infidelity as some kind of desperate, understandable gasp for attention and connection. And that last line, "I hope you find peace eventually," read as if she hadn't been the hurricane that had torn through the calm waters of my life. I didn't reply to that email. What was there left to say? That she didn't destroy me? Only revealed that I had built too much of my life around someone who never intended to protect it? The words felt pointless and unnecessary. That night, I went for a long walk through the city. Not just a quick trip around the block, but miles and miles through neighborhoods that I used to ignore when I was wrapped up in the drama of our deteriorating relationship. I passed by homes that glowed warmly from inside, with soft lamplight and the suggestion of quiet family dinners. The kind of genuine peace that I used to think Jessica and I were building together. Somewhere between mile 3 and mile 4 of that walk, I realized something important. I wasn't mourning Jessica anymore. I was mourning my idea of her, the version I had constructed in my head over the years. I had been grieving the loss of the loyal, driven, sharp woman who I believed would walk through fire for me. But that person had never actually existed. Or maybe she had existed once, briefly, before she got bored of everything being too steady and predictable. In Jessica's world, I came to understand loyalty was always conditional. Affection was a performance that required a constant audience. And when life became too still, too real, too much like the actual work of building something lasting, she simply found someone else to play audience for her act. A few nights later, I ran into Kayla, who had been Jessica's best friend, or former best friend, I should say. We happened to be at the same bookstore downtown, and she spotted me browsing the shelves. She paused for a moment, like she was deciding whether to say anything at all, but then approached me anyway. "I'm not here to stir things up or take sides," she said immediately. I just wanted to say that I had no idea about what she was doing. I had absolutely no clue about any of it. I believed her without hesitation. Kayla had always been straightforward and honest in all the interactions I'd had with her over the years. Thanks, I said simply. It's over now. She's trying to make people believe that you were emotionally cold to her, Kayla said after a brief pause. But honestly, everyone who knew you both could see how hard you tried to make that relationship work. She's rewriting the whole story because the truth makes her look bad. I nodded in acknowledgement. That's her specialty, rewriting history to suit her narrative. Kayla nodded back, and then she said something that has stuck with me ever since. She always hated mirrors, you know. I think you were one for her. She left the bookstore after that brief conversation, but I walked home with that sentence echoing repeatedly in my mind. She always hated mirrors. It made perfect sense when I thought about it. Mirrors don't lie or allow for creative interpretation. They show you exactly what's there, without filters, without excuses, without the endless justifications that Jessica relied on to maintain her self-image. And I had been one person in her life who never let her pretend or live in fantasy. I held up the truth about who she was, steady and clean and uncompromising. So she smashed that mirror rather than face what it was showing her. But I'm still here, still standing, still reflecting reality clearly. And for the first time in years, I'm starting to see myself clearly again too. It was a Saturday morning when Jessica's name appeared on my phone screen again. This time, it wasn't a text message, but a missed call followed by a voicemail. I stared at the notification for about half an hour before I finally pressed play, unsure of what I might hear. Her voice was different this time, completely different from any of our previous interactions. There was no anger, no calculated performance, no attempt at manipulation. Just a hollow, empty quality that I had never heard from her before. Kevin, I shouldn't be calling you, I know that. Her voice came through the phone speaker. But I was driving past the lake this morning. You know that little spot off Bayfront Park where we used to take Bruno? It still looks exactly the same. It still has that ugly bench with the chipped green paint. She paused, and I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, suggesting she was calling from her car. I thought about you, about us. Not about the end, but about the beginning, when we were still okay with each other. I don't even know why I'm leaving this message. You won't call me back, but if I could somehow rewind things, I would. Not just the cheating, all of it. The way I treated you, the way I talked to you, like you were just furniture in your own life. I can see it now, and it's awful. I sat perfectly still in my loft, my thumb pressed against the phone screen, my jaw clenched as I listened to words I had never expected to hear from her. I was so angry all the time, and I blamed you because you were safe, because I knew you wouldn't leave me no matter what I did. You were constant and solid, and I hated that I couldn't shake you, so I tried to break you instead. I think I really did try to break you. And now, she trailed off for a long moment. Anyway, I'm not calling to ask you to come back. I had to say this to someone who remembers who I used to be before all this happened. I'm sorry, Kevin. I really am. Click. The call ended abruptly. No background music, no dramatic crying, just raw words stripped of all the spin and manipulation I had become so accustomed to from her. But I didn't feel the emotional pull that I might have expected from such a message. I didn't feel that old, familiar reflex. The one that used to whisper, maybe she means it this time, or maybe there's still something worth salvaging here. That reflex had died weeks ago, buried under every lie, every instance of gaslighting, every time she had turned her guilt into a weapon to use against me. Still, something about that voicemail nudged at me. Not regret exactly, but a kind of relief. She was finally starting to see the damage she had done, not just to me, but to herself and to everything we had tried to build together. But it was far too late for any of that awareness to matter. I didn't delete the message, but I didn't respond to it either. Instead, I created a new folder on my laptop and titled it Unfinished. I saved her voicemail to that folder, alongside a few old photographs from our early days together. Not because I wanted to dwell on them or revisit them regularly, but to remind myself that closure isn't always clean and neat. Sometimes it lingers in fragments and half-resolved emotions. That same evening, I had dinner with my old friend Darren. He and I hadn't really talked much over the past year. Jessica had never liked him, claiming he was too cynical and negative. Her translation of that sentiment was actually that he saw right through her act and wasn't fooled by her charm. We met at a pub near his office and sat outside under the heaters, nursing our beers. We were 2 drinks deep before either of us said anything particularly meaningful. "You look lighter," Darren said finally, studying my face. "Like a guy who isn't trying to hold up the ceiling all by himself anymore." I laughed, and it felt good to laugh genuinely. "I was holding up the whole damn house." "I know," he said simply. "We all knew. You just didn't see it yourself." Then he told me a story that I had never heard before. He explained that Jessica had once called him a parasite for suggesting that we spend less time double dating with her coworkers and more time just hanging out as friends. She had actually cornered him at a party and told him that he was bad for my personal growth and development. He had never told me about that incident because he didn't want to put me in a position where I felt like I had to choose between my girlfriend and my friend. "I didn't get it then," I said, shaking my head, "but now I understand completely." Darren raised his glass toward me. "To freedom, however ugly the road there might be." We clinked our glasses together, and the sound felt like a small celebration of survival. When I got home that night, I took a long, careful look around my loft. It was quiet, but not in that haunted, empty way that had characterized the early days after Jessica left. This was just peaceful quiet, the kind that comes from genuine contentment rather than the absence of conflict. Jessica's voice didn't echo in these walls. Her perfume didn't cling to the pillows or linger in the air. Her emotional presence didn't live in the corners of these rooms, waiting to spring out and demand attention. It was just me and my space, and for the first time in years, that felt like more than enough. I walked over to Bruno's bed and knelt down to rub behind his ears. He rolled onto his side with a satisfied grunt, his tail thumping lazily against the floor. "You good, buddy?" I asked him softly. He thumped his tail once against the floor in response, and I knew we were both in a good place. We were healing. Slowly, but surely. About a month after the last time I heard Jessica's voice, I received something completely unexpected. An actual letter. Not an email or a text message, but a handwritten letter folded neatly inside an envelope with my name written across the front. It wasn't addressed formally as Mr. Kevin or with any flowery language. Just a simple Kevin written in that unmistakable, sharp, confident handwriting of hers. It was the same style she used when she was closing business deals. Not the script she reserved for personal notes or love letters. The envelope had been slid under the door of my loft at some point during the day. Bruno hadn't even barked when it arrived, which told me that even he no longer considered her a threat to our peace. She had become nothing more than a ghost passing through our lives. I didn't open the letter right away. I left it sitting on my table for 2 full days, unread and unopened, almost daring myself to touch it. There was something weighted and final about it. Something that suggested this would be her real closing argument. Her version of how our story should end. She hadn't texted again or called since that voicemail from the lake. There hadn't been even a whisper of communication between us. So whatever was contained in that envelope was probably her attempt at having the last word. Her final statement about what had happened between us. On the 3rd day, I finally broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The letter wasn't very long, but every word seemed carefully chosen. "Kevin, I know you're not looking for more words from me, but this isn't for you to respond to. I just needed to say it. I was cruel. I know that now I used your steadiness as my excuse to drift. I twisted your patience into control, and when I felt small, I tried to shrink you to match. That's not love. I know that now too. I've started therapy, not because I want to win you back, but because I want to stop being someone who leaves people worse than she found them. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you know that what I did had nothing to do with what you lacked. You were more than enough. I just wasn't ready to be anything real. I hope the next woman sees you clearly, Jessica." That was it. No return address, no attempt to pull me back into any kind of ongoing dialogue or relationship. Just a letter written with what seemed like shaking honesty, the kind of raw truthfulness I had never seen from her during the entire time we were together. It hit me harder than I expected, but not because it made me want her back. It affected me deeply because it confirmed something I had been quietly hoping for without fully realizing it. That she finally understood the magnitude of what she had done and the person she had been. I put the letter in the same drawer where I kept the folder labeled unfinished. Then I went outside to get some fresh air. It was cold outside. Winter was brushing in early this year, and the wind coming off the river carried that sharp bite that makes your lungs ache a little in a good way. It was the kind of air that wakes you up and forces you to be present in the moment. I stood on the bridge near the end of my block, watching the water pass underneath. The current was fast and relentless, flowing without breaks or apologies, just moving forward with purpose and determination. And I thought about everything that had brought me to this point. All those nights I had stayed awake while she came home late, and lied straight to my face. The dinners she had skipped without explanation. The fights she had picked over nothing. The way she had weaponized silence to punish me for imagined slights. The man who had taken what I cherished like it was just some casual thrill for him. The version of myself I had become over those final months. Diminished, careful, constantly calculating how to avoid upsetting someone who seemed perpetually disappointed in my very existence. And now, standing on that bridge in the cold air, I realized that I didn't flinch when my phone rang anymore. I didn't second-guess the tone of my messages or worry about how my words might be misinterpreted. I didn't feel like I was constantly apologizing for simply breathing and taking up space in the world. I didn't need revenge against Jessica. I didn't need to torch her world or make her suffer for what she had done to me. Life had handled that responsibility on its own. Her guilt, her silence, and that raw, honest letter were all proof that walking away without screaming or causing a scene had still been loud enough to get through to her. Healing isn't a pretty process. It doesn't come with some dramatic moment where light suddenly breaks through the clouds and you feel completely whole again. It's small and slow and often frustrating. It's the quiet decision you make every single day to stop reopening the same wound over and over again. That night, I made several important decisions. I deleted Jessica's phone number for real this time. Not just blocked, but completely removed from my contacts. I didn't save her voicemail from the lake, and I didn't reread her letter. I just sat in my loft with the lights turned low, a soft blanket draped over my legs, and watched Bruno twitch in his sleep like he was chasing something exciting in his dreams. And for the first time in what felt like a decade, I realized that I had no questions left about what had happened between us. I didn't need anything more from Jessica, not closure, not justice, not even answers to the remaining mysteries about her behavior. I already had everything I needed. Myself, my peace of mind, and my self-respect. Winter settled in for real that week. Snow flurries began hitting the sidewalks and gathering in soft clumps against the corners of buildings and parked cars that hadn't moved in days. Everything became a little quieter than usual, muffled by the weather and the season. There was something deeply peaceful about it, like the world was asking me to pause for a little while, to sit still, and let things simply be what they were. I took that cue and ran with it. I spent more time offline, away from social media and digital distractions. No more scrolling through old photos of Jessica and me during better times. No more hovering over her name in my blocked contacts list, wondering if I should unblock her to see if she had tried to reach out. I stopped checking the profiles of our mutual friends to see if I could glean any information about what narrative Jessica was building about our breakup, or who was buying into her version of events. Whatever story she was telling people about me wasn't mine to control anymore. I had my truth, my experiences, and my perspective on what had really happened. That was more than enough. One night, about a week before Christmas, I ran into Darren again. We decided to grab coffee instead of beer this time, and we sat in the back corner of a quiet cafe, away from the holiday bustle and crowd. He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who had known me for years. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. "You look like you finally left something heavy behind, like you're not carrying some invisible weight anymore." I nodded slowly, stirring my coffee while I considered his observation. "Yeah, I think I did leave something behind." "Did you forgive her?" he asked directly. I paused, thinking carefully about my answer. "I don't know. Maybe not yet, maybe never completely. But I don't hate her anymore either. That's not the same thing as forgiveness, but it's something." I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. It had been 2 full months since Jessica and I had last seen each other face to face. And in that time, I had gone from checking my door every day, half expecting her to show up with some new explanation or plea, to genuinely hoping she never would. I didn't want her back in my life, that much was crystal clear. But more importantly, I didn't want the version of myself that I had been when I was with her to come back either. I was no longer the guy who tolerated silence as a form of punishment. I was no longer the person who twisted himself into uncomfortable shapes to make room for someone else's emotional emptiness and manipulation. And honestly, the guy I had become in the aftermath of our relationship, I liked him significantly more than the person I had been before. He was more grounded, calmer, and more self-assured. He didn't apologize for taking up space in the world or for having needs and boundaries. Around New Year's, Kayla messaged me again. This time, it was just one simple line. She moved out of state. I read that message twice, then 3 times, letting the information settle in my mind. There was no emotion attached to it on my end, no plea for further conversation or details, just a straightforward statement that served as a clear boundary marker in my life. I appreciated Kayla's directness and the fact that she wasn't trying to pull me into any drama or extended discussion about Jessica's departure. Jessica was gone. Physically, emotionally, completely off my radar. And what surprised me most was that I didn't feel anything close to heartbreak about this news. There was no lump forming in my throat, no sudden urge to drive past our old street one more time, no nostalgic pull toward the places we used to frequent together. It was like reading the last page of a book that I had been trapped inside for far too long, and finally realizing that I could pick up a completely new story. One that didn't begin with lying smiles and hidden agendas, and didn't end in betrayal and emotional devastation. A few nights later, I walked Bruno down to the waterfront again, past that same bench with the chipped green paint that Jessica had mentioned in her voicemail from the lake. But now it didn't feel haunted by our shared memories or weighted down with painful associations. Instead, it felt like a checkpoint, something I had survived and successfully moved beyond. I sat on that bench for a while, watching the cold air roll over the dark water of the river. Bruno snuggled up against my leg, his eyes squinting against the wind, content to simply be present with me in the moment. Then I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. At the top, I wrote, "What I want now, not what I lost, not what I need to forgive, but what comes next." And as I started typing my thoughts and plans for the future, something beautiful occurred to me. This story wasn't about what Jessica had done to me anymore. It had transformed into something much more powerful and meaningful. It was the story of what I had done after her betrayal, how I had chosen to respond and rebuild. It's strange how healing doesn't announce itself with celebration or fanfare. There's no big round of applause, no dramatic moment when the lights dim and the curtain falls on your pain. It's much quieter than that, much more gradual and subtle. The final stage of healing feels more like walking into a room that you haven't been in for a very long time, gently brushing off the accumulated dust from the furniture and surfaces, and realizing that it still feels like home, even though it looks different than you remembered. That's exactly where I am now in my journey. It's been almost 6 months since Jessica left my life in scattered pieces, and now I don't feel broken anymore. I don't even feel like I'm in the process of healing. I feel rebuilt, reconstructed from the ground up, not because someone else came along to fix me or rescue me from my pain, but because I sat in the emotional rubble long enough to really understand it, to learn from it. And then I stood up and started building something new and better. I've changed in ways that I didn't even notice at first. My mornings are slower now, more deliberate and peaceful. There's no tension constantly residing in my jaw, no second-guessing the tone of my text messages before I send them. I've completely stopped apologizing for who I am or trimming myself down so that someone else could feel taller or more important. I read more books now. I laugh more often and more genuinely. I've reconnected with people that Jessica had quietly and systematically pulled me away from over the years. You don't realize just how isolated you've become until you hear someone say, "It's really good to see you again," and they truly mean every word of it. I still walk by the lake sometimes, but not for nostalgic reasons. I go there because it's mine again. That space, those memories, that peace. The old bench with its chipped paint has become a place where I sit sometimes to sip my morning coffee and watch the wind move through the trees. The ghosts that used to follow me around have disappeared completely. They stopped haunting me when I finally stopped feeding them with my attention and emotional energy. When I think about Jessica now, it's not in the obsessive, circular way I used to. I don't wonder who she's with or what she's doing in her new life. I don't check up on her through social media or mutual friends. And honestly, I don't care about the answers to those questions anymore. Because I finally understand something that I couldn't see when I was still trapped in the middle of our toxic dynamic. She didn't ruin me or destroy my capacity for love and trust. What she actually did was reveal me to myself. She showed me all the places where I had gone quiet to keep the peace, where I had bent myself backward to avoid confrontation, where I had stopped asking for what I needed because it made her uncomfortable or defensive. That version of myself, the one who tolerated disrespect in the name of love, who accepted crumbs and called it a feast, he's gone now. And in his place stands someone who is fundamentally stronger, clearer about his boundaries, and more confident in his worth. Someone who understands on a bone-deep level that love without respect is just an elaborate performance, and that loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing yourself to keep a liar comfortable in their deception. So here's my advice to anyone who might be reading this. Anyone who is currently standing in the ashes of their own life, holding the weight of someone else's betrayal. Don't rush to rebuild everything immediately. Don't try to patch over the damage or pretend it didn't happen. Instead, sit in those ashes for a while. Really feel every part of the pain and disappointment. Understand it completely, learn from it, let it teach you what you need to know about yourself and about the relationship you thought you had. Because the version of yourself that eventually walks out of that fire will be fundamentally different, sharper, braver, more self-aware, and unapologetically whole. You'll never again mistake crumbs for a full meal, and you'll never again accept treatment that diminishes your worth as a human being. This story was never really about how Jessica broke my heart. Looking back now, I can see that it's actually the story of how I finally stopped letting people treat my heart like it was disposable. It's about how I learned to value myself enough to walk away from someone who clearly didn't value what I was offering. My name is Kevin. I was cheated on, lied to, gaslit, and dismissed by someone I loved deeply and trusted completely. I was made to feel like I was the problem in my own relationship. Like my expectations of basic honesty and fidelity were somehow unreasonable or controlling. And you know what? I lived through all of it. More than that, I healed from it, learned from it, and became a better man because of it. I didn't just survive Jessica's betrayal. I used it as fuel to build a life that I'm genuinely proud of, with standards that I'll never compromise again. I'm no longer afraid of being alone, because I've learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. I'm no longer willing to accept less than I deserve, because I finally know what I'm worth. If you're going through something similar right now, if you're dealing with the aftermath of betrayal or the collapse of a relationship you thought was solid, please know this. It's going to hurt for a while, maybe for longer than you think you can bear. But that pain is not permanent, and it's not pointless. That pain is teaching you something essential about yourself, about your boundaries, about what you will and won't accept from the people in your life. And when you come out the other side, and you will come out the other side, you'll be someone who commands respect simply by refusing to accept anything less. You'll be someone who knows the difference between love and performance, between loyalty and codependence, between compromise and self-betrayal. And that knowledge will serve you for the rest of your life, protecting you from ever finding yourself in this situation again. The person who betrayed you may have thought they were breaking you. What they actually did was reveal your strength, your resilience, and your capacity to rebuild something beautiful from the wreckage they left behind. That's not a tragedy, that's a triumph.